Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to another episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. My name is Dr. George Sparks. I got a very important guest with us today. I'm very excited to have him here with us. His name is Dr. David Graves, PhD. And this is also going to be sponsored by, of course, BibleInteract. Let me introduce this gentleman. Dr. David Graves got his PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and he's also a native of Canada, and he has been involved in the teachings of the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years, has now retired as an assistant professor from Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity in Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at Oxford University, England, provided tours at the Ashmolean and also the British Museum, traveled extensively in the Middle East, been involved in Mount Ararat research, that sounds like a lot of fun, and consulted National Geographic in their productions. He has also been involved in the archaeological excavations at Qumran, that's the Dead Sea Scrolls area, the Temple Mount, and Shiloh, all located in Israel, as well as in Jordan, Tel el-Hammam. He was at the excavation project. And in 2017, he was part of the team who excavated the Dead Sea Scroll cave, Cave 53 near Qumran. So it's a new cave that's been examined. And his discovery and evidence, along with other team members, has led to a new identity of a cave called Cave Q12. For many years, David has been a field supervisor at the Tel el-Hammam excavation, which is known as the new Sodom area. It has Roman and Byzantine periods. It's also located on the Madaba map, if those are familiar with the Madaba map in Jordan. And he has excavated from 2005 to 2019 at Tel el-Hammam. He is also a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society, NEAS. He has authored a number of books published through his company and also has many journals on the Bible and archaeology, which will be available, and we will show you the link. His interests are, he likes, of course, biblical research, Roman archaeology. He travels. He's also into painting. He's a painter. And he's into, of course, the ancient Near East. This is interesting. Noah's Ark research. We got to pick your mind on that one. Revelations, the 7 letters to the Asia Minor. And also today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about salt in a ritual, fertility. So what's this going to be about? It's going to be a lot of fun. At this point, all right, before we go into the podcast with Dr. David Graves, we're going to cut off, break away, and introduce you to this video that he done specially for the introduction of his book.
Sodom and Salt in Their Ancient Near Eastern Cultural Context is a peer-reviewed journal article written by Dr. David E. Graves and published in 2016 in the Near East Archaeological Society Bulletin, Volume 61. The fact that the narrative of Genesis chapter 19 verse 26 describes Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt, and not some other substance, is consistent with the use of salt in the violation of a covenant and its associated curse in the ancient Near East called in Hebrew the harem, and with the practice of throwing salt on property that symbolized infertility and barrenness. Lot's wife, in being turned into a pillar of salt, was seen through ancient Near Eastern eyes as now being infertile and barren and under the covenant curse. The importance of fertility in the context is further reinforced in the narrative in Genesis chapter 19 by the necessity of the incestuous union between Lot and his daughters. In addition, the present soil analysis demonstrating high levels of salt after the Middle Bronze destruction and the mysterious Late Bronze gap of the following 500 years with no occupation in the Jordan Valley, especially at Tel el-Hammam, which has been identified as Sodom, also seems to converge in supporting this infertility hypothesis. The ancient Near Eastern readers of the account would have clearly understood the association of Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt with the ancient Near East covenant curse mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 28. In Van Ruij's study of infertility in the ancient Near East, he concludes that it demonstrates to what extent the subject of fertility as blessing and infertility as curse lived in the hearts and minds of the people of the ancient Near East. Without this understanding, much of the myth and ritual of the ancient Near East cannot be understood precisely because it was directed to fertility, while in Israel petition and sacrifice often had the same aim. In this context, salt, so prominent around the Dead Sea, was the perpetual reminder of infertility and the violation of the covenant. And the archaeological evidence around Tal el-Hammam also appears to converge and bear witness to this fact. More research on the association of Sodom with salt can be found in the book The Location of Sodom by Dr. David E. Graves. All our books are listed on our website smyrnaean.blogspot.com and can be found on amazon.com. Thank you for watching.
Okay, welcome back. Let me briefly go over the excavation at Tel Hammam. He has been there for 10 years, 10 to 15 years, and has researched the location of Sodom for over 40 years. And he wrote one of his first academic papers in 1978 to 1979 in his undergrad course in biblical archaeology. In the last video that we had, that 2.5 minute, we're talking about salt causing infertility of the soil, and in the pronouncement of the curse of infertility. And it is an accompany with the soil, the salt in the soil, as a ritual act. And he's going to introduce us to that. And he's also going to refer to the biblical scriptures, the scriptural narratives, such as in Genesis 19 and 26, describes Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt and not any other substance, and why that is so important, and also the violation of a covenant and why the use of salt is important during that, or a product of that violation. And it's associated with the curse called the Harim in the ANE, ancient Near East. And with this practice of throwing salt on property, symbolizing the infertility and barrenness. We're going to go into that as well. This is going to be very, very interesting, folks. Also, the implication of barrenness in Genesis 19:30 to 38, why Lot had an incestuous relationship with his 2 daughters. And the ANE readings of an account, but also clearly understand the association of Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt in relation to this salt ritual. So, and he's going to compare this into the scriptural narrative, Deuteronomy's 28, verse 15 to verse 68. We're not going to go over that whole verse. I think we're going to look at, I'm not going to put them on the spot, but in Deuteronomy's 28 and 23, just briefly, and it says, the heavens over your head shall be turned to bronze, and the earth under your feet shall be turned to iron. So in other words, the ground's going to be cursed, and the Lord will make it rain down on your land powder from heaven. Dust shall come down onto you until it is totally destroyed. So in Deuteronomy, it pronounces a type of curse on the land because of the people's disobedience. All right, Dr. Graves, I'm going to bring this over to you. This is giving the people an introduction to what we're going to talk about. So please, go ahead, take it away.
Well, thanks, George. It's a pleasure to be with you today. This has always been a fascinating subject for me. When I read the biblical narrative concerning Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt, I was always wondering, why is it that it was turned into a pillar of salt? When I was doing my PhD research on the Hittite suzerainty treaties and the covenant, I kept coming across references to the land being cursed and salt or other condiments being thrown onto the cities as a symbol of it being cursed. And so I thought, well, I'll investigate that a little bit. And during my research, I discovered that Philo had asked the question. He was one of the first to ask the question, why was Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt and not something else? Well, it turns out that as I began to investigate the Bible and the references to the curse, the covenant curse, which my PhD was involved with, I discovered that here we have the ancient Near Eastern practice of throwing salt on a city when it is cursed. And of course, this is what we have with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Deuteronomy 29 says, the whole land burned out with brimstone and salt, nothing sown and nothing growing, where no plant can sprout or overthrow like that of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim. So we have the occasion of salt mentioned with the account of Sodom and Gomorrah, with Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt. But here's the connection with a city in the farewell speech of Moses, with a violation of covenant, with the cities being placed under the curse and throwing salt on them. Now, what's really interesting is that we end up with probably about 6 references in the Bible to cities being cursed in this way. Jericho is placed under the harem, or the curse. Now, salt is not mentioned in Genesis 13, but it is mentioned with the destruction of Shechem in Judges 9. 1 Kings 2, using salt there for the Elisha's purifying the curse. And then we have the oracles with Moab and Ammon. Well, I began looking into the ancient Near Eastern accounts because my PhD was the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and I found there's at least 9 occasions where they reference the use of cursing a city and putting salt. In the Assyrian, it's called ipsu, and kidamu. If you look up the Assyrian dictionaries, it translates those as salt or condiments. There in the ancient Near East, they had a practice of throwing salt on the city when they were destroyed. The Bible supports the ancient Near Eastern practice, but it helps us now to understand why salt is mentioned in the biblical text and why Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt.
You mentioned briefly before we went live the importance of how to understand this text, whether it be literal or whether it be figurative. Could you explain that to us?
Well, I love archaeology because archaeology helps us to understand the text. And so I'm always looking for how I can understand the significance of what's being mentioned in the biblical text. So for me at this point, whether it's literal or it's figurative really doesn't matter, because what God is saying to us in that text is when Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt, literally or figuratively, to those people, this city has been cursed and the covenant has been breached. Everybody who read that during that time period would understand what God is talking about in the biblical text. It's clearly pointing to the fact that Lot's wife is now infertile, the infertility of the land, the infertility of the idea of being cursed, and the city no longer being able to produce life. It can't be inhabited. And we tie this back now to archaeology, and we can talk about that in a moment, about the archaeology we found in the Jordan Valley after it was destroyed and completely wiped out, and our research we found with our salt samples.
The implication of salt in a ritual curse means that the land will be barren and will be infertile. That's also being applied figuratively or literally to Lot's wife. This was confusing for me for a long time. And now maybe the epiphany, because we had this discussion, share this with our listening audience because this is really cool. Why did Lot have incestual relationships with his daughters?
This can also have an application to that passage of Scripture as well. This whole idea of infertility and not being able to bear children and this incestuous relationship could all have a connection theologically in the text. So archaeology helps us expand our understanding of the culture and helps us understand why these things are mentioned in the context of the violations of the covenant, of the curse, of God saying, you violated what I promised.
That does help explain why all of a sudden, like in your article, why is it salt? Why can't it be something else? But in this reference to this location of Sodom, you said at first in your research back in 1978, it was Numeran Babadra, but you had changed your mind. Could you go into your history of searching for the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, what you were looking for and what you found, the evidence of the salt, you said in the soil, but your journey in searching for the lost city. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, back in my undergrad, I did an archaeology class. That's where I sort of fell in love with archaeology. I decided to do a paper on Sodom and Gomorrah, and my professor said there was a fellow here in Toronto that you should talk to, Dr. Bryant Wood. He believes he's found it down at Babadra. So I went down to Toronto Baptist Seminary and I talked to Dr. Wood, and he shared with me his articles and his research, and I wrote my paper and got an A in it because I did my research. But at that time, I wasn't really paying attention to the geography of the text. Years later, many years later, I was going to go dig with Dr. Bryant Wood, and that year he couldn't dig because it wasn't safe. A colleague of mine said, "Why don't you come and dig with us at a new site in Jordan?" And I went there and signed up, and lo and behold, this is where Dr. Stephen Collins believed that Sodom was. Well, I had believed it was Bobadra for many years. So I began doing my research. I excavated for many years, 10 of the 15 years at Tel el-Hammam. And as I did my research and continued to look at the biblical text, I changed my mind based on the evidence. It's on the north end of the Dead Sea. The Hebrews cleared Kikar. There's many arguments for this. I have a whole book on the location of Sodom where I compare the two sites and the arguments for both and why I have changed my mind on it. And it's okay for scholars to change their mind if they have the appropriate evidence placed before them.
You got more than one book out there, because in that short little video, I'm going to refer back to the video because it's going to show like 5-6 different books, and each one with a different topic. One of them that we're on actually today about the location of Sodom and also the use of salt and infertility. But you have other books as well, and I encourage you people to go to that site and look at his books. Last night I purchased I think 5 or 6 books. I just did them all at once because I want to have you back to our program, and we're going to discuss each one of these areas and maybe some of the other you haven't wrote a book on yet. I think the idea that you went back to Qumran is cool. This Mount Ararat project, that sounds pretty interesting to me as well. I'd really like to share you with our audience because you have a vast experience and you have a lot of books out there. And there's not just 20 pages, folks. I thought I was going to buy his book, and last night, my little narcissistic self, I was going to sit down and read it because I was going to download it off a Kindle, and it'd be like 40 pages, 50 pages. No, this is like 250 pages. So this is like serious research on all these topics, and it's very affordable. All these books are very affordable. And then we're going to have them back on the program. So if you get the books, we're talking about that subject in each one of those topics. It's just going to be fantastic. I'm learning stuff already about the why salt was used according to this ritual practice, especially in Sodom and Gomorrah, and why now you went from Bobadra, in a more eastern southern location on the Dead Sea, going north because now are you in the Jordan Valley now? Southern Jordan Valley, but north of the Dead Sea?
Yes, the Kikar, when you look at the text, Abraham and Lot are between Bethel and Ai when they decide to separate and go their separate ways, and Lot picks the Kikar, the cities of the plain. Well, you can see the cities of the plain from Bethel and Ai. You cannot see Bobadra from that location. And our site, Tel el-Hammam, where we excavated for over 15 years, is directly across from Bethel and Ai. So the geography of the text places it exactly where the Bible says it should be. We went there, we dug, and we have the evidence with the destruction layer in the Middle Bronze time period when Abraham and Lot lived. So there's no doubt in my mind right now that Tel el-Hammam is ancient Sodom.
The screen behind you is the location of Tel el-Hammam. That's, when we say Tel, that means a mound, the strength, if you will, the T-E-L, and that's Tel el-Hammam. Now, Hammam means like a hot spring. Usually, you go overseas to Islamic community, if it's a hammam, it might be like a hot bath or something like that. You can go and
yes.
So when it's Tel el-Hammam, tell us what's in that name itself, Tel el-Hammam.
Well, we have 5 hot springs that are around our site that were used up until the Roman period. I excavated a bath complex from the Roman period that I believe was Herod Antipas's hot bath. Remember, he's the guy that beheaded John the Baptist. That's a whole other project in the Roman period. But that's why the site was called Hammam, was because of all the hot springs at the site. In order to survive in that wilderness, that barren land, you need water. Having 5 hot springs used for agriculture, used for drinking, and also using it for ritual purposes, this has become a very important site, even during the time of the Neolithic period when other sites went out of business in the Jordan Valley. Tel el-Hammam kept going. It's 10 times larger than Jerusalem or Jericho at the time period of the patriarchs. So it was on the map.
Are you guys going to go back to Tel el-Hammam? Do you know if you're going to go start the dig again or not?
It has been stopped initially. Dr. Collins has stopped going there to dig, but some of his colleagues may go back in the future to excavate there. I don't know. Nothing's been announced, but at the moment we've been 15 years. We've got enough information that we can call it.
Now, let's say that you're going to Israel and you got your itinerary for your tour. Is there any way a tour group could take people over to Tel el-Hammam, or is it roped off?
Some tour groups do go there. It's a private property owned by a man by the name of Abu Ahmed, who just died. So his family now owns it. So it's private property, and it's probably not something you want to go and venture off on your own. But if a tour company, I think Dr. Collins this year is going to be taking a tour group back to Israel and Jordan, and they will be able to take you around to the different sites. And this is obviously one that he's going to stop at. And I think Dr. Scott Stripling this year as well is going to do a tour, and he'll be stopping there as well. I worked with Dr. Stripling at Tel el-Hammam in the Roman period, Excavations, and I also worked with him at Shiloh. He'll be a good tour to hook up with as well.
You mentioned something about the soil or the sand around Tel el-Hammam, that you did some research, examining it, probably sent it off to a lab or whatever, the content of salt in that area. Can you tell us something about that as well?
Our research now has concluded that the destruction of the cities of the plain, or Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities, were a result of a cosmic airburst, a bolide. This is a meteor that comes in, or an asteroid that comes into the atmosphere and explodes, similar to the ones that happened in Russia recently, where it comes in and explodes in the atmosphere and creates an airburst, and everything explodes. We found evidence around the Jordan Valley and on our site of this catastrophe. We've had over some 21 authors from 21 different universities and scientists, many of them not Christians, do research on all of the proxies that we have collected. So we go around and we find examples from the soil, and then we send it off to the lab, and they wrote up an extensive scientific paper in Scientific's report that was published in 2021. I published my paper in 2016. And so in just that short time period, they have verified what I've speculated in my paper that I wrote in 2016 on Sodom and salt. And that is, when we examine the soil after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah at the Middle Bronze period, the soil samples showed a toxic level of salt in them. So nothing could grow in the Jordan Valley for 500 years. And archaeologically, at every site that has been excavated around the Jordan Valley, this has proven true.
Okay. So in the biblical narrative, I always assumed that what came down from heaven, being, it says in the text, you read it as bitumen, like you think of a volcano going off. But there's more than that now. There might be, you say like the meteor strike. So, but it didn't strike. It's an air burst. That's what you're saying. And it'd be the concussion and the force of the burst, like the Tungsten burst in.
Yes.
Okay, that's back around what, 1912? Tunguska, yes, Tunguska. Is that wrong? I'm from New Mexico. We speak Spanglish here, y'all. And
well, my wife is Russian, so she helps me with my pronunciations.
That would help you. So
yes.
To get back to so we got a number of different things. So the salt was not just figurative, because if you analyzed and you found a high content toxic salt, something happened not just with the airburst, but also what would cause the salt? What would cause that much salt all of a sudden? Did it have an airburst and then rain down salt?
Well, the Bible talks about something coming out of the sky, raining fire and brimstone from the sky. This is an example of this perfectly. An airburst occurs close to the body of the salt water of the Dead Sea, and the vapor plume raised by the detonation, can deposit a significant volume of salt brine over the entire large area of the Dead Sea and poison the remaining soil for a very long time. So this is a perfect scenario to describe exactly what is described in the Bible. In regions such as semi-arid regions such as the Middle Gore, the recovery time to regenerate unusable soil is pushed to even a longer end of the scale because of the insufficient precipitation to flush out all of that salt from the land. So it takes 500 years for that salt to be removed from the soil so they can plant crops. They can move now from the top of the Jordan Plateau on the top down into the valley again. And archaeologically, that's exactly what we find there. The Greeks, the Dutch, there's other, they're not Christians that have excavated at other sites around Tel el-Hammam, have found the exact same footprint. Mm-hmm. Destruction at Middle Bronze. In fact, they call it the Middle Bronze Gap. Mm-hmm. So we have...
That's leading into what we call in archaeology the Late Bronze Age period. Yes. So are you talking about between the 16th century and the 13th century then? That's the gap? Well, yeah. A little, it has to be more than that, but that means it had to actually happen before the Middle Bronze Age ended, because the Late Bronze Age is not 500 years. I'm being complicated for the listening audience. I don't want them to look up the Late Bronze Age and say, hey, that's not 500 years. What are we talking about? So the evidence of Sodom and Gomorrah has to happen in the Middle Bronze Age before the Middle Bronze Age comes to an end and continue through the Late Bronze Age, which would be 1550 to 1200 BC. Now, it isn't like 1200 BC on January at 2 o'clock, that kind of stuff. It's what we kind of figuratively just have to do something. So we say 1200 BC.
That's right. So the time period can shift a little bit there. But what is significant is that there's about and I'm saying 500 years. The dating can be off maybe by 100 years or something, but there's a long period of time after the destruction, the Middle Bronze period, where there is no occupation in that whole region. All of that evidence is laid out in my book on the location of Sodom. There's local references. I write my books for the undergraduate individuals, so it's not written for scientists or for academics, but I put footnotes in it so that you can look up and do your own research and confirm what I'm saying. I tell people, don't believe what I say just because I say it. I come with the receipts.